The fluorescent lights of Pierce Industries' 63rd floor cast long shadows across the marble lobby as Evan Mitchell pushed his cleaning cart toward the executive wing. It was past midnight, the hour when the building transformed from a hive of corporate ambition into a cathedral of silence. He preferred it this way. The quiet gave him space to think, to remember, and sometimes, mercifully, to forget. Evan was 42, but looked older. Life had carved lines into his face that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with experience. His hands, calloused and strong, moved with practiced efficiency as he wiped down the glass walls overlooking the city. Each motion was deliberate, methodical habits from another life that he couldn't quite shake. Working late again? Evan? Sophie Chen, one of the few executives who bothered learning his name, paused by the elevator with her briefcase. Same as always, Miss Chen. His voice was quiet, with a slight rasp that suggested stories he'd never tell. You know, you can call me Sophie. We've worked on the same floor for 2 years. She smiled warmly. And you're here more consistently than half our management team. Evan allowed himself a small smile. Consistency pays the bills. After she left, he returned to his work, his mind drifting to the small apartment in Queens where his daughter Lily was sleeping. At 7 years old, she was his entire world. The reason he woke up each morning. The reason he'd traded battlefield commands for mop buckets. The reason he kept his past buried beneath janitorial uniforms and carefully neutral expressions. The upcoming corporate gala weighed on his mind. Pierce Industries was celebrating its acquisition of a major defense contractor, and the building would be transformed into a glittering spectacle of wealth and power. Alexander Pierce, the 35-year-old CEO who'd inherited the company from his father, would make his grand entrance. Evan had seen him exactly twice in 2 years, both times from a distance, both times surrounded by an entourage of admirers. As Evan cleaned the grand ballroom that would host tomorrow's event, he paused before the massive portrait of Alexander Pierce hanging near the entrance. The man's steel-gray eyes seemed to look through whoever gazed upon them, projecting an aura of absolute confidence. Evan recognized that look. He'd seen it in young officers fresh from West Point, before combat taught them the difference between command and leadership. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily's babysitter, Mrs. Rodriguez. She's asleep but keeps asking when you'll be home. She made you a drawing. Evan's expression softened. He typed back quickly, then returned the phone to his pocket, his fingers unconsciously brushing against the edge of his sleeve, against the hidden marks beneath the fabric, a past he'd carefully concealed from this sanitized world of boardrooms and balance sheets. Tomorrow night would be his longest shift. The gala would run until 2 in the morning, and he'd be responsible for maintaining the service areas, emptying trash, ensuring the wealthy attendees never had to confront any evidence of mess or imperfection. It was invisible work, which suited him perfectly. He'd spent the last 5 years perfecting the art of being invisible. As he locked up his supplies and headed for the service elevator, Evan caught his reflection in a polished steel door. For just a moment, he saw himself as he used to be, Captain Evan Mitchell, decorated Special Forces officer, leader of men, survivor of operations that existed only in classified files and nightmares. Then he blinked, and there was only the janitor again. Anonymous and unremarkable, the city lights sparkled below as he descended, each floor counting down like the years he'd spent building this new life. By the time he reached the ground level and stepped out into the cool October night, he'd pushed the memories back down where they belonged. Tomorrow would be just another day, just another shift, just another evening of staying invisible. He had no idea how spectacularly wrong he was. The Pierce Industries ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, every surface polished to impossible perfection. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across 500 guests, dressed in designer suits and evening gowns that cost more than Evan made in 6 months. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, emptying champagne flutes from high-top tables, ensuring the spectacle remained unblemished. More champagne over here. A woman's voice cut through the classical music, sharp with the entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. Evan nodded politely, his cart already moving toward the bar to retrieve fresh glasses. The energy in the room shifted suddenly, subtly, like a change in air pressure before a storm. Alexander Pierce had arrived. The CEO moved through his domain with casual authority, his tailored tuxedo fitting him like armor. He was handsome in the way powerful men often are not naturally, but through the enhancement of expensive grooming, personal training, and the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. His entourage trailed behind him like planets orbiting a Sunday. "Alexander, congratulations on the Morrison Defense acquisition." An older executive pumped his hand enthusiastically. "Your father would be proud." "My father thought small," Alexander replied, his voice carrying across the room with practiced projection. "I think global." "That's the difference." Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. The kind of laughter that greets every utterance from someone who controls the paychecks. Evan had been reaching across a high-top table to collect empty glasses when it happened. A guest stepped backward without looking, bumping directly into his cart. The carefully balanced tray of fresh champagne flutes tilted, and despite Evan's quick reflexes honed through years of combat, 3 glasses tumbled directly onto Alexander Pierce's pristine white jacket. The room fell silent. 500 conversations died in an instant. Alexander stood frozen, champagne dripping from his lapels, his expression cycling rapidly from shock to fury. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the janitor, who just committed social suicide. "You incompetent idiot." Alexander's voice cracked across the silence like a whip. "Do you have any idea what this jacket costs? What this event means?" "I'm sorry, sir." Someone bumped into Evan began quietly. "I don't want your excuses." Alexander cut him off, his face flushing red. He grabbed a napkin from the nearest table, dabbing uselessly at his ruined jacket. "This is exactly what's wrong with this country. No attention to detail. No pride in work. You're probably one of those people who thinks the world owes you something, right? A failed man with a mop. That's all you'll ever be." The words hung in the air, cruel and deliberate. Several guests looked away uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. No one dared challenge Alexander Pierce at his own gala. Evan stood perfectly still, his hands loose at his sides. His face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, something old and dangerous that vanished almost before it appeared. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I apologize for the accident, sir. I'll get this cleaned up immediately." "You'll do more than that," Alexander sneered. "You'll be lucky if you still have a job Monday morning. Now get out of my sight before you ruin anything else." Evan bent to retrieve the fallen glasses, his movements controlled and precise. As he reached for the last one, his sleeve rolled up slightly, revealing just a hint of dark ink on his wrist. A partial wing. A talon. Something martial and permanent. He noticed Alexander's security chief, a gray-haired man named Tom Brennan, staring intently at his exposed forearm. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Brennan's expression shifted from casual attention to intense focus, his mouth opening slightly, as if to speak. But Evan had already pulled his sleeve down, collected the broken glass, and begun moving toward the service exit. "Daddy," the small voice cut through the murmurs of resumed conversation. Lily stood near the ballroom entrance, wearing her best dress, a hand-me-down from Mrs. Rodriguez's granddaughter that she'd insisted on wearing to surprise her father at work. Rodriguez stood behind her apologetically, having clearly been unable to stop the determined 7-year-old. Evan's carefully maintained composure cracked. He moved quickly toward his daughter, kneeling down to her level. "Lily, what are you doing here, sweetheart? I wanted to see where you work." Mrs. Rodriguez said it was a party. And she stopped, noticing the tension in her father's shoulders, the way every eye in the room was watching them. "Daddy, why is everyone staring?" "It's okay, princess. We're just going home now." He stood, taking her hand gently. As they turned to leave, Alexander's voice carried across the room one final time. "Of course, even his personal life is a mess. Single father, can't even keep his kid at home, How pathetic. Evan stopped. His hand tightened around Lily's, then deliberately relaxed. Without turning around, he said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Being a father is the only thing I've never failed at, sir. I hope someday you'll understand what that means." Then he walked out, his daughter's hand in his, leaving behind a room full of uncomfortable silence, and one security chief, whose eyes had gone very wide indeed. The subway ride back to Queens took 40 minutes. Lily sat pressed against her father's side, unusually quiet. She could read his moods better than anyone, sensing the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "I'm sorry I came to your work," she said softly, as they emerged from the station into the cool night air. "Don't be sorry, baby girl. You didn't do anything wrong." Evan squeezed her hand gently. "You're never wrong for wanting to see your dad." Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator was broken again, so they climbed the stairs together, Lily's small hand warm in his calloused palm. Mrs. Rodriguez had already gone home, leaving a note about leftover dinner in the fridge. After Lily changed into her pajamas, she climbed into bed, but patted the space beside her, their signal that she wanted to talk. Evan sat down, and she immediately snuggled against him. "Daddy, why did that man laugh at you?" The question he'd been dreading. Evan was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes people with power forget what it's like to not have it. They forget that everyone matters, not just the people in fancy clothes. "But you matter," Lily said fiercely. "You matter the most." Evan felt his throat tighten. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "You know what? You're absolutely right. And you know why? Because I have you. And you have me. And that's worth more than anything that man will ever own. Will you lose your job? Maybe. But we've been through harder things, haven't we?" He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Remember what I always tell you? We're Mitchells. We don't quit, we don't complain, and we take care of each other." She recited it like a mantra, which it was. "That's right. Now, you need to sleep. School tomorrow, remember?" After she drifted off, Evan sat on the edge of her bed, watching her peaceful face in the dim glow of her nightlight. The unicorn lamp cast soft shadows across her features. Features that reminded him so much of her mother that sometimes it physically hurt. Sarah had been a trauma surgeon, brilliant and brave. They'd met at a military hospital in Germany, where he'd been recovering from a mission that had gone sideways. She'd patched him up, called him stubborn, and somehow they'd fallen in love between blood transfusions and physical therapy sessions. 3 years of marriage, one beautiful daughter. And then, Sarah had volunteered for a humanitarian mission in Syria. The roadside bomb hadn't discriminated between soldiers and doctors. That was 5 years ago. 5 years since he'd left the military, taken Lily, and disappeared into civilian life. 5 years of building a quiet existence where his daughter could grow up safe, normal, never touched by the violence that had defined his adult life. Walking into the small living room, Evan caught sight of himself in the mirror above the second-hand couch. Slowly, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing the full tattoo that covered his right forearm, a falcon in mid-dive, talons extended, with coordinates and a unit designation beneath it. The mark of Operation Iron Falcon. The mark of a mission that had saved 73 lives, including one young lieutenant fresh from graduate school, who'd been attached to their unit as an intelligence liaison. A lieutenant named Alexander Pierce. Evan had recognized him immediately at the gala. Despite the years and the expensive grooming, the arrogant CEO had been a terrified 22-year-old back then, trapped behind enemy lines. Certain he was going to die, Evan had led a 12-man team through 40 miles of hostile territory to extract the surrounded unit, fighting through ambushes and artillery fire. He'd carried Pierce himself for the last 5 miles, when the young man's leg had been injured by shrapnel. But that was another life. Another person, almost. Captain Evan Mitchell had died with his wife. And in his place was just Evan, father, janitor. Ghost. He pulled down his sleeve and locked the door, checking it twice, another habit he couldn't break. Tomorrow, he'd look for new employment. The city was full of buildings that needed cleaning. He'd find something. He always did. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie Chen. "I heard what happened. That was wrong. Call me if you need a reference." Small kindnesses in a harsh world. Evan texted back his thanks, then set his phone aside. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television playing a late-night talk show, the sounds of normal life continuing its endless cycle. In the morning, he'd make Lily her favorite breakfast pancakes with too much syrup. He'd walk her to school, attend the parent-teacher conference he'd scheduled 3 weeks ago, and then start making calls about work. The routine would continue because it had to, because Lily needed stability more than he needed pride. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, Evan couldn't quite silence the voice in the back of his mind, the voice that still remembered what it felt like to be someone, to lead men into impossible situations and bring them home, to be respected not for wealth but for courage. That voice wondered what would happen if Alexander Pierce ever realized who he'd humiliated in front of 500 people. That voice, small but persistent, whispered, "Maybe he needs to remember." By Monday morning, the story had spread through Pierce Industries like wildfire through dry brush. Evan Mitchell, the quiet janitor from the night shift, had been publicly humiliated by the CEO himself. The details grew more embellished with each retelling. Some versions had him crying, others had him thrown out by security. None captured the quiet dignity of what had actually happened. Evan arrived for his shift at 10 p.m. as scheduled, uncertain whether his keycard would even work. It did. He made his way to the service area, expecting to find a termination notice in his locker. Instead, there was only his usual assignment sheet and a handwritten note. "See me when you clock in. Tom Brennan." Tom Brennan was head of corporate security, a former Marine who ran his department with military precision. Evan had interacted with him exactly 3 times in 2 years, always briefly, always professionally. Now, walking toward Brennan's office on the security level, Evan felt an old instinct kicking in, the awareness of being evaluated, measured, identified. "Mitchell, come in." Close the door. Brennan's office was sparse, functional. Military citations hung on one wall. Distinguished Service Cross. Bronze Star with Valor. Purple Heart. A warrior's wall. Evan closed the door and stood at ease, hands clasped behind his back, another habit from the old life. Brennan studied him with sharp eyes. Saturday night. The gala. "I saw your wrist." Evan's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "The tattoo." "Just for a second, but I saw it. Falcon with talons. Coordinates beneath." Brennan leaned forward. "I was Army. 22 years. I know what that mark means. Special Forces, top-tier operations, that particular design." He paused. "That's from Operation Iron Falcon, Iraq. 2015, the mission that extracted 73 soldiers and civilians from a surrounded position near Mosul. Sir, I clean floors. I think you've confused me with someone else." "Have I?" Brennan pulled a folder from his desk drawer, opened it. Inside were printouts, military records, commendations. A photograph of a man in combat fatigues. The man was younger, leaner, but unmistakably Evan. Captain Evan Mitchell, Delta Force. 3 silver stars. The Army Cross for extraordinary heroism. Led Operation Iron Falcon. Saved 73 lives. He looked up. "Retired 5 years ago after your wife died. Took your daughter and disappeared. I wouldn't have found this if I hadn't specifically gone looking." Evan remained silent, his face carefully neutral. "I'm not trying to expose you," Brennan continued quietly. "I'm former military myself. I know why guys like us sometimes need to step back, to be invisible for a while. But Mitchell..." He closed the folder. Our CEO humiliated a war hero Saturday night. A man who saved American lives at great personal risk. And he has no idea. With respect, sir, I'd prefer to keep it that way. I don't need recognition. I just need steady work to support my daughter. I understand. But there's something you should know. Brennan stood, walking to his window that overlooked the city. Alexander Pierce was military too. Did his 4 years as an intelligence officer. Officer branch, desk mostly, but he did a combat rotation in Iraq. 2015. He turned back. He was part of that surrounded unit. You saved his life, Mitchell. The information settled over the room like snow. Evan processed it, though he'd already known. That was 10 years ago. He was young, scared. Probably doesn't remember faces from back then. Probably not, Brennan agreed, but he should, because the man he mocked Saturday night for being a failed man with a mop is the reason he's alive to run this company. What are you suggesting, sir? Nothing. I'm not suggesting anything. Your secret is safe with me. You have my word as a Marine. But I wanted you to know that someone here sees you for who you really are. And if you ever need anything, my door is open. He extended his hand. It's an honor to work in the same building as you, Captain. Evan shook his hand briefly. It's just Evan now. And I appreciate your discretion. As he left Brennan's office and returned to his janitorial duties, Evan felt unsettled. The walls he'd built between his past and present were beginning to crack. That night, as he cleaned the executive floors, he found himself moving through the building differently. Noticing things he'd trained himself to ignore: security vulnerabilities, evacuation routes, defensive positions. Old instincts rising to the surface, like bones through earth. Sophie Chen caught him in the break room around midnight. Evan, I'm so glad you're still here. I heard rumors you were fired. Still employed, apparently. He poured himself coffee from the ancient machine. What happened Saturday was disgraceful. Alexander was drunk and showing off, but that's no excuse. She hesitated. You handled it with more grace than most people would have. I've seen executives tear into each other over smaller slights. I have a 7-year-old daughter, Miss Chen. She needs me to keep my job more than she needs me to defend my ego. Sophie, please. And that's really admirable. She studied him thoughtfully. You know, you don't talk like most janitors I've met. No offense intended, none taken. I had some college before life got complicated. The lie came easily, practiced over years. What did you study? History, leadership, things that don't pay bills. He smiled slightly. Turns out cleaning does. After she left, Evan returned to his cart. But her words stayed with him. He didn't talk like a janitor. He didn't move like one either. Not to trained eyes. How long before others started noticing? How long before his carefully constructed invisibility failed? His phone buzzed, a text from Lily, who was supposed to be asleep. Love you, Daddy. You're the best dad in the whole world. Evan smiled, the tension easing slightly from his shoulders. This was why he stayed invisible. This was why the past needed to stay buried. Because Lily needed a father, not a hero. Not a broken soldier carrying ghosts and medals in equal measure. He texted back, "Love you more, princess. Go to sleep, or you'll be grumpy tomorrow." Her response was immediate, no promises. That emoji, such a small, normal thing, made him feel more human than any military commendation ever had. He pocketed his phone and returned to work, pushing the memories back down, rebuilding his walls one careful brick at a time. But in his locker, tucked behind his lunch bag, was Tom Brennan's business card with a handwritten note. "When you're ready to be seen again, let me know." Evan left it there, untouched but not forgotten. 3 days after the gala, Evan received an unusual assignment. A memo appeared in his locker, printed on company letterhead. E. Mitchell. Report to Executive Level 60. 3 for daily maintenance. Duration: indefinite. Direct supervisor: A. Pierce. Sophie found him staring at the memo during his break. Oh no, is that what I think it is? I'm being reassigned to clean the CEO's floor personally. Evan's voice was flat. Starting tonight. That's petty. Really petty. Sophie's face flushed with anger. He's doing this to humiliate you further. Making you clean up after him specifically. It's work. I'll manage. But they both knew what it meant. Alexander Pierce wasn't finished punishing the janitor who dared to embarrass him at his own gala. That night, Evan took the executive elevator to the 63rd floor for the first time in 2 years. The executive level was designed to intimidate floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, modern art pieces that probably cost 6 figures each, and at the center, a massive glass-walled office that belonged to Alexander Pierce. The CEO was still there at 10 p.m., working at a standing desk, his silhouette backlit by the glowing city skyline. He didn't look up when Evan entered with his cart. Evan began his work, methodically emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces, maintaining the pristine environment that wealth demanded. He worked quietly, trying to be as invisible as possible. You're still here, Alexander's voice cut across the silence. He turned from his desk, arms crossed, regarding Evan with cold assessment. I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face. I was assigned to this floor, sir. I'm just doing my job. Your job. Alexander walked closer, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. Tell me something. Do you enjoy being a failure? Does it satisfy you, knowing this is the peak of your achievement, cleaning up after your betters? Evan continued wiping down a conference table, not responding. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. Evan straightened, meeting Alexander's Haza directly. Up close, he could see the resemblance to the terrified young lieutenant from a decade ago, same eyes, same jawline, but hardened by years of privilege and unchallenged authority. I asked you a question, Alexander pressed. Does it feel good to be nothing? With respect, sir, Evan said quietly. I don't think you'd understand what real purpose feels like. The words hung between them like a challenge. Alexander's face flushed. Excuse me? Leadership isn't about power, sir. It's about responsibility. It's about putting others first, even when it costs you everything. Evan's voice remained calm, but something in his tone had shifted steel beneath silk. Real leaders don't punch down. They lift people up. And you think you know about leadership? You, a janitor? I know that leading people through hell teaches you things boardrooms never will. I know that real strength is continuing forward, even when you're broken. And I know that the measure of a man isn't his bank account, it's what he does when no one's watching. Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea who you're talking to. I know exactly who I'm talking to. For just a moment, Evan's carefully controlled facade slipped, revealing something harder underneath. The question is whether you know who you are. Before Alexander could respond, the elevator dinged. Tom Brennan stepped out, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Pierce, the security reports you requested. His timing was deliberate. Brennan had been monitoring the situation, ready to intervene if needed. His eyes met Evan's briefly, a silent message of support. Alexander snatched the folder from Brennan's hands. Get out, both of you. And Mitchell, you're here until 2 a.m. tonight, every night this week. I want this entire floor spotless. Yes, sir. Evan collected his cart and moved toward the elevator. As the doors closed, Brennan spoke quietly. You okay? Fine. But Evan's hands were gripping the cart handle tightly, and his sleeve had ridden up slightly during the confrontation, revealing the edge of his tattoo. Brennan noticed. He's pushing you, trying to make you quit or lose your temper. I know what he's doing. Evan pulled down his sleeve. I've handled worse. I don't doubt it. The elevator descended smoothly. But Mitchell, how long are you going to let him treat you like this? You're better than... I'm a janitor, Brennan. That's all I am now. That's all I need to be. Is it? The elevator reached the ground floor. Because from where I'm standing, you're teaching him a lesson he desperately needs. You're showing him what dignity looks like, what real strength is. Evan stepped out of the elevator, then paused. He doesn't need lessons from me. He needs to figure it out himself. Maybe. Or maybe he needs to know who you really are. Brennan held the elevator door. The unit that was extracted from Mosul in 2015, I pulled the records. Lieutenant Pierce was recommended for a Bronze Star for his actions during that siege. Did you know that? No. He showed real courage that day, apparently. Helped coordinate the defense. Kept morale up when things looked hopeless. He was a good officer under pressure. Brennan let the door start to close. Sometimes people forget who they were when life gets too easy. Sometimes they need to be reminded. The elevator doors shut, leaving Evan alone in the empty lobby, his reflection staring back at him from the polished marble walls, a ghost of who he used to be, trapped in a present that didn't quite fit. That night, lying in his narrow bed after checking on Lily 3 times, Evan stared at the ceiling and allowed himself to remember Operation Iron Falcon in full detail. The heat, the fear, the sound of mortars falling like thunder. And yes, a young lieutenant with intelligent eyes, and a voice that didn't shake even when it should have, helping organize the defense, refusing to let panic spread through the surrounded soldiers. That man had been worth saving. Evan wondered what had happened to him. How he'd transformed from a brave officer into a petty tyrant who mocked janitors at corporate galas. War changed people, but apparently, so did peace sometimes for the worse. His phone lit up with another text from Lily. Can't sleep. Miss you. When will you be home tomorrow? Breakfast time, princess. I'll make pancakes. With chocolate chips? Is there any other kind? You're the best, Daddy. I love you to the moon. Love you to the moon and back, baby girl. Evan set down his phone and closed his eyes, letting his daughter's words wash over him like absolution. This was enough. Being her father was enough. The past could stay buried, but in the darkness, his fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the tattoo on his wrist, the falcon, the coordinates, the mark of the man he used to be. Mosul, Iraq, July 2015. The mortar rounds fell in a rhythm that Captain Evan Mitchell had learned to anticipate: 3 explosions, 30 seconds of silence, then 3 more. It was almost merciful, that rhythm. It gave the surrounded unit time to breathe, to think, to hope between the blasts. Sir, we've got maybe 6 hours before they overrun us completely. Sergeant Carlos Reyes crouched beside Evan in what remained of the compound's command post. The walls won't hold past dark. Evan studied the tactical map spread across the rubble-strewn floor, marking enemy positions with quick, precise strokes. 73 soldiers and civilian contractors, surrounded on 3 sides by insurgent forces, pinned down in a half-destroyed Iraqi army outpost that hadn't been properly fortified since the initial invasion. Intel says relief is 12 hours out, minimum. Lieutenant Alexander Pierce, the young intelligence officer attached to their unit fresh from some graduate program, spoke with admirable steadiness despite the blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his leg. We can't hold that long, Captain. Then we don't hold, Evan said simply. We break out. The silence in the room was absolute, except for the distant sound of automatic weapons fire. Sir, that's suicide, Reyes said carefully. They have our egress routes locked down. We'd be cut apart in the open. Not if they're looking the wrong direction. Evan's finger traced a route on the map north through a wadi that should have been watched but wasn't, if his instincts were correct. Lieutenant Pierce, your satellite imagery from this morning. Show me the northern sector again. Alexander pulled up the images on his damaged tablet, wincing as he shifted his wounded leg. Despite his obvious pain and fear, his hands were steady. Here, there's a gully system that runs northeast about 1,000 meters. Provides decent cover until it opens up onto the highway. Except, Reyes interjected, that gully is probably mined or watched. They'd be stupid not to cover it. They would be, Evan agreed. But they're not stupid, they're arrogant. They have us pinned. They think we're waiting for relief. They're concentrating their forces on the obvious routes, because that's where they expect us to run. He looked up, meeting each man's eyes in turn. We go north. Fast and quiet. We leave before dawn, move in 3 groups with 60-second intervals. My team leads. Lieutenant Pierce coordinates movement from the center. Reyes brings up rear guard. "Sir, I can fight," Alexander insisted, his pride warring with his injury. "I'm not dead weight." Evan studied the young officer, barely 22, more accustomed to briefing rooms than firefights, but there was steel in his eyes. The kid had been treating wounded soldiers for 6 hours straight despite his own injury, keeping morale up, refusing morphine because he wanted to stay sharp. That counted for something. You'll coordinate communications and keep everyone moving at pace. That's not dead weight, Lieutenant. That's critical. Evan stood, feeling his 32 years and every wound he'd collected over 3 combat tours. Everyone else, prepare to move. Light packs only. Wounded on stretchers, but mobile wounded walk. We leave in 90 minutes. The next hour was controlled chaos, distributing ammunition, destroying sensitive equipment, preparing the wounded. Evan moved through it all like a conductor, calm and certain, exuding the kind of confidence that made frightened men believe the impossible might be possible after all. Alexander found him checking weapons in what remained of the armory. "Captain Mitchell? Lieutenant." I wanted to say, the young officer paused, choosing his words. "My first combat assignment, first time under fire, and you. You're exactly the kind of leader they told us about at West Point, the kind we should aspire to be." Evan loaded a magazine, not looking up. "West Point gives you theory, Lieutenant. The field gives you reality. Sometimes they match. Usually they don't. Still, thank you. For not leaving me behind when I got hit. For not," Alexander's voice broke slightly. "For making me believe we might actually survive this." "We will survive," Evan said, finally meeting his eyes. "Because we're going to keep our heads, trust each other, and move like our lives depend on it, because they do. Remember this feeling, Lieutenant. Remember what it's like when everything's on the line and all you have is the people beside you. That's what real leadership is built on." 3 hours later, they were moving through the darkness, 73 souls in 3 columns, navigating by night vision through a landscape of death. Evan led point with 4 of his most experienced operators. Behind him, Alexander Pierce coordinated the main body despite his wounded leg. His voice calm on the radio, even when mortar rounds started falling again. They ran into contact at the halfway point, an insurgent patrol that was in exactly the wrong place at the wrong time. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. 2 Americans wounded, 5 enemy killed. They kept moving because stopping meant dying. Evan carried one of the wounded soldiers for the last 3 miles, when the man's strength gave out. Alexander refused a stretcher entirely, limping on his ruined leg, using his rifle as a crutch, never slowing the column. When they finally reached the extraction point and the helicopters descended like salvation roaring out of the dawn, Evan did a head count 3 times. 73 had gone into that compound. 73 came out. Not one left behind. As medics loaded Alexander onto a helicopter, the young lieutenant grabbed Evan's arm. "I won't forget this, Captain. I won't forget what you did." "What real leadership looks like." Evan nodded once, already turning back to his team. "To the endless work of war. Heal up, Lieutenant. The Army needs good officers." That was 10 years ago. The last time Evan had seen Alexander Pierce. The man had been a wounded but brave young officer who understood sacrifice and believed in something bigger than himself. What he'd become since then was a mystery that troubled Evan more than he wanted to admit. The emergency board meeting was called for 8 a.m. Thursday morning, early enough to catch executives before they scattered to their various domains. Evan arrived at 5 a.m. to prepare the 63rd floor, unaware that his normal routine was about to implode spectacularly. By 7:30, The executive conference room was filling with Pierce Industries' senior leadership, 12 men and women who collectively controlled billions in assets. Evan worked quietly in the adjacent break room, preparing coffee and ensuring everything was perfect for the meeting. Mitchell. Tom Brennan's voice was quiet but urgent. You need to leave. Now. I'm not finished with. I'm serious. There are people in that meeting who'll recognize you. Military contractors, defense consultants. Please, just go. But before Evan could respond, Alexander's voice cut across the conference room. Where's my coffee? Mitchell, get in here. It was a power play, petty and deliberate, forcing the janitor to serve coffee in front of the board. Brennan's face went pale. But Evan simply picked up the coffee service and walked into the conference room with practiced neutrality. The space was dominated by a massive glass table where 12 executives sat in leather chairs that probably cost more than Evan's car. Alexander presided at the head, his expression smug, as Evan entered. Gentlemen, ladies, this is our facility staff demonstrating our commitment to service. Alexander's tone dripped with sarcasm. Mitchell, coffee for everyone. Try not to spill it this time. Evan moved around the table methodically, filling cups with steady hands. He'd almost completed the circuit when it happened, reaching across the table to fill the final cup for a gray-haired man in a navy blazer. His sleeve rode up past his wrist, exposing the full tattoo on his forearm, the falcon in mid-dive. The coordinates. The unit designation. And beneath it all, barely visible, the words, Iron Falcon, 73 to 0. 73 saved, 0 left behind. The gray-haired man, Admiral James Hutchinson, retired Navy SEAL and current defense consultant, went absolutely still. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes locked on the tattoo, with the laser focus of someone who recognized its significance. Captain Mitchell? His voice cracked across the room like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Evan straightened slowly, carefully neutral. Admiral Hutchinson. Evan's voice was quiet. It's been a long time, sir. My God, it is you. Hutchinson stood, his chair scraping back loudly. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know who's serving you coffee? This man. He pointed at Evan with something approaching reverence. This man is Captain Evan Mitchell, Delta Force, Operation Iron Falcon, the mission that saved 73 American lives from certain death in Mosul. The room erupted in confusion. Executives looked from Hutchinson to Evan to each other, trying to process the information. There's some mistake, Alexander said. But his voice had lost its confident edge. This is a janitor. No mistake. Hutchinson walked around the table, standing directly in front of Evan. I studied that operation for my master's thesis on modern extraction tactics. Captain Mitchell led a 12-man team 40 miles through hostile territory to extract a surrounded unit. He brought out every single person, alive soldiers, contractors, even a wounded intelligence officer. He looked at Alexander. Do you remember being that wounded intelligence officer, Mr. Pierce? The color drained from Alexander's face. What? Operation Iron Falcon. July 2015. You were there, weren't you? Young lieutenant? Leg wound from shrapnel? Hutchinson's voice softened. This man saved your life. The silence in the room was absolute. Alexander stared at Evan, as if seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. That was. You were. Evan set down the coffee pot carefully. Sir? I'd like to return to my duties. Captain Mitchell received 3 silver stars and the Army Cross, Hutchinson continued, ignoring Evan's attempt to leave. He retired 5 years ago, after his wife, also military, a trauma surgeon, was killed in Syria. He left with full honors and enough commendations to fill a wall. He looked around the room, and apparently, he's been cleaning your floors for 2 years. Sophie Chen, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner taking notes, spoke up. Mr. Pierce, I think you owe this man an apology." Alexander seemed frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Other board members were pulling out their phones, clearly looking up Operation Iron Falcon, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to something approaching shame. "The gala," Alexander whispered. "I called you. I said you were." His face went from pale to bright red. "Oh God," Evan spoke quietly but firmly. "I'd like to return to work now." "With your permission, sir." "Permission?" Alexander's voice was strangled. "No, wait, please." He stood, his legs unsteady. "Captain Mitchell, Evan, I." Words seemed to fail him entirely. Tom Brennan appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes showing concern for Evan. "Captain, you're clear to go." "Actually," Hutchinson interjected, "before you leave, may I shake your hand? It's genuinely an honor to meet you. Your tactics in that operation are still taught to special operations candidates." Evan shook his hand briefly, uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you, Admiral. But I was just doing my job. My team did the real work." "A leader who deflects credit to his team." Hutchinson smiled sadly. "That's exactly what the report said about you." He glanced at Alexander. "Real leadership indeed." Evan left the conference room with as much dignity as he could muster. But he could feel every eye in the room on his back. As he pushed his cart toward the elevator, he heard Alexander's voice behind him. "Wait. Please wait." The CEO half ran across the office, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the marble floor. He looked nothing like the arrogant man from the gala. He looked young, confused, and deeply shaken. "I didn't know," Alexander said, breathing hard. "I had no idea. That night in Mosul, I never saw the face of the captain who led the extraction. It was dark, we were moving fast, and I was half delirious from blood loss and pain medication. I remembered the tattoo, the falcon, but I never." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I called you a failure. I mocked you in front of hundreds of people. And you saved my life. You were a scared lieutenant doing your best in an impossible situation," Evan said quietly. "What happened in Mosul has nothing to do with now." "Yes, it does. Everything to do with it." Alexander's voice was raw. "You taught me what leadership meant that night. You showed me what courage looked like, what putting others first meant. And then I spent 10 years forgetting everything you showed me." The elevator dinged. Evan moved his cart inside. "Please," Alexander said desperately, "let me make this right. Let me—" "You can't make this right, Mr. Pierce. What's done is done." Evan pressed the button for the ground floor. "But you can remember who you used to be. The officer you were that night, that man was worth saving. Try to find him again." The elevator doors closed on Alexander's stricken face. Evan took 3 days off after the board meeting. He called in sick for the first time in 2 years, spending the time at home with Lily, trying to process what had happened. News of his identity had spread through Pierce Industries like wildfire. His phone, a number he'd given to exactly 4 people, somehow received 17 calls from reporters and 11 from companies offering him security positions. He ignored them all. On the 4th day, he returned to work. His keycard worked. His locker was undisturbed. The assignment sheet simply said, "See Tom Brennan." Brennan's office felt different this time, less like a superior's workspace and more like the office of a fellow veteran. "Coffee?" Brennan offered. "Please." They sat in silence for a moment. 2 soldiers who understood the weight of what had transpired. Finally, Brennan spoke. "Alexander Pierce has been trying to reach you. Called me 6 times. Showed up at my house once. I know. He found my number somehow. Left 11 voicemails. Have you listened to them?" "No." Evan sipped his coffee. "What's the point?" "The point is that man is genuinely devastated by what he did. I've worked here 3 years. I've never seen him like this. He's barely sleeping, barely eating, just sitting in his office, staring at old military records from Operation Iron Falcon. That's not my problem, Tom, isn't it? Brennan leaned forward. You told him to remember who he used to be. He's trying, but he can't do it alone. Before Evan could respond, there was a knock on the door. Brennan's assistant poked her head in. Sir, Mr. Pierce is here. Says it's urgent. Evan stood to leave, but Alexander was already in the doorway, blocking his exit. The CEO looked terrible, his expensive suit rumpled, dark circles under his eyes, his face haggard. Please, Alexander said. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Evan looked at Brennan, who gave a slight nod. Your call. Finally, Evan sat back down. 5 minutes. Alexander entered, closed the door, and then did something that stunned everyone in the room. He removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeve, and revealed a tattoo on his own forearm, a small falcon, newly inked, still covered in protective wrap. I got this 3 days ago, Alexander said quietly. It's not the same as yours. I didn't earn it. But I needed to remember what it means. What you taught me in Mosul, that leadership is sacrifice, that real strength is protecting those who depend on you. His voice cracked. And I forgot. God help me. I forgot everything that mattered. Evan studied him carefully, seeing past the privilege and polish to the scared young lieutenant beneath. Why are you here, Alexander? To apologize. Formally, completely. What I said at the gala, the way I treated you, it was inexcusable. I humiliated a better man than I'll ever be because my ego was bruised by champagne stains. He pulled out a document, set it on Brennan's desk. This is my resignation letter. Effective immediately. The board already has it. I'm stepping down as CEO. That's not necessary, Evan said. Yes, it is. This company needs a leader, not a tyrant. Someone told me once that real leaders lift people up. I've been doing the opposite. Alexander took a shaky breath. But before I go, I wanted to offer you something. Pierce Industries is launching a veterans reintegration program, helping former military find meaningful work, adjust to civilian life. We need someone to run it, someone who understands what they're going through, someone with real credibility. I'm not qualified for. You're the most qualified person in this building, Alexander interrupted. And we'll pay accordingly. Salary of $300,000. Full benefits. A real office. And most importantly, you'd be helping people who need it. People like us. Evan was silent for a long moment. $300,000 would change everything for Lily. Private school, college fund, a real savings account, security, but it would also mean exposure, visibility, being known. Can I think about it? Evan finally asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. Alexander stood, extended his hand. But regardless of your answer, I need you to know something. That night in Mosul, you didn't just save my life. You showed me who I wanted to be. I'm sorry it took 10 years and a public humiliation for me to remember. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you thought I could be. Evan shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of someone who meant what they said. You were brave that night, Alexander. You kept people calm when they wanted to panic. You refused to give up even when you were wounded. That man is still in there. You just have to choose to be him. After Alexander left, Brennan whistled low. $300,000 to run a veterans program. That's one hell of an apology. It's not about the apology, Evan said slowly. It's about whether I'm ready to stop being invisible. Are you? Evan thought about Lily, about the opportunities this money could provide. But he also thought about all the veterans out there struggling to adjust, fighting invisible wars in their minds, unable to translate military skills into civilian success. People who needed guidance from someone who understood. I need to talk to my daughter, Evan said finally. That evening, after dinner, Evan sat with Lily on their worn couch and told her everything about the military, about Mosul, about Alexander, about the job offer. She listened with 7-year-old solemnity, her small hand wrapped around his. "Daddy, you're a hero," she said when he finished. "No, baby girl, I'm just your dad. You can be both." She hugged him tightly. "And if you take the job, you'll help other daddies. Other heroes who need help. That's what you do, you help people." Out of the mouths of children, Evan thought. Truth so simple, it hurt. If I take it, things will change. We might move to a better apartment. You'd go to a better school. But people might recognize me. Might ask questions about the past. "I don't care about apartments or schools," Lily said firmly. "I only care about you. And I think you should do it. Because helping people makes you happy." I can tell. She was right, of course. She always was. The next morning, Evan called Alexander Pierce and accepted the position. 3 months later, the Veterans Reintegration Program launched with 15 participants, former soldiers, learning to navigate civilian careers, with Evan as their guide and advocate. And Alexander kept his word. He stepped back from daily operations, taking a role as board chairman, but letting others run the company. He spent his time learning to listen rather than command, to serve rather than demand. The two men, one who'd led through hell, one who'd followed, began rebuilding the bridge between who they'd been and who they wanted to be. Part 9. The Father's Legacy. 6 months after accepting the position, Evan stood backstage at a veterans benefit dinner, adjusting his tie nervously. He'd worn his dress uniform first time in 5 years at Alexander's request. The medals felt heavy on his chest, not with pride, but with memory. "You look handsome, Daddy." Lily, dressed in a new blue dress that she'd picked out herself, beamed up at him. Like a real hero. "I'm just giving a speech, Princess. That's not heroic. It is if you're scared and do it anyway," she said wisely. "That's what bravery means, right?" Before he could answer, Sophie Chen appeared, now serving as the program's director of operations. "5 minutes, Evan." "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Good. That means you care." She squeezed his arm supportively. "You've already changed 12 lives in 6 months. Tonight, you're going to inspire hundreds more." The benefit was being held at the Pierce Industries Tower, the same building where Evan had once pushed a cleaning cart in anonymity. Now, 200 veterans and supporters filled the grand ballroom, the same room where he'd been humiliated a year earlier. Full circle, he thought. When his name was called, Evan walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The lights were bright, the crowd massive. He found Lily's face in the front row, her proud smile giving him courage. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I was working as a janitor in this building. I was invisible, anonymous, and I thought that was enough. I thought hiding from my past was the same thing as protecting my daughter's future." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But a wise CEO once told me, after publicly humiliating me, that real leadership means lifting people up. That wisdom came from a place of pain and regret. But it was still wisdom, and it made me realize something. Hiding from who you were means you can't help others become who they need to be." The room was absolutely silent, hanging on his words. The veterans in our reintegration program aren't looking for handouts or pity. They're looking for someone who understands, someone who knows what it's like to carry invisible wounds and visible skills that don't translate to civilian life. Someone who can say, "I've been there, and there's a path forward." He looked directly at Alexander, sitting in the front row beside Tom Brennan. "This program exists because someone had the courage to admit they were wrong, to recognize that power without compassion is tyranny, and to do the hard work of changing." After the speech, Evan was surrounded by veterans wanting to talk, to share their stories, to thank him. He stayed for 3 hours, listening to each person with genuine attention. This, he realized, was why he'd survived Mosul. Not for glory or recognition. But so he could be here now, helping others survive their own battles. Lily eventually tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, I'm tired. Let's go home, princess." He scooped her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. As they walked through the lobby, Alexander caught up with them. "Evan." "Wait." They stopped. Alexander looked down at Lily, smiled gently. "You must be very proud of your father." "The proudest," she confirmed. "He's the best daddy in the whole world. I believe it." Alexander looked at Evan. "Thank you. For that speech. For this program. For everything." "You did the hard part," Evan replied. "You changed." "That takes more courage than most people ever show." They shook hands not as CEO and employee, but as equals. As brothers in arms, who'd both fought their own wars and survived. That night, Evan tucked Lily into bed, read her favorite story, and kissed her forehead. "Love you to the moon, princess." "To the moon and back, Daddy." She yawned, already half asleep. "I saw you on TV today. At work. Everyone was talking about my hero, Daddy." "What did you tell them?" "That you're not a hero, you're just my dad. But you're the best one ever." After she fell asleep, Evan stood by her window, looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed a message from one of the program participants. "Thank you for believing in me, when I'd stopped believing in myself." That, Evan realized, was enough. Not medals or recognition or even redemption. Just the quiet knowledge that he was making a difference in the present. Not hiding from the past. The tattoo on his wrist caught the light from the hallway, the falcon, eternal in its dive. Representing a mission completed years ago but never truly finished. Because leadership didn't end when the battle did. Real leadership was helping others long after the guns went silent. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, make pancakes, walk Lily to school. Then he'd go to work and meet with 3 new veterans joining the program. Small moments, ordinary days, but filled with purpose. And that was everything. 3 years later, the Falcon Foundation had grown beyond anything Evan had imagined. What started as a small reintegration program at Pierce Industries had expanded into a nationwide network, helping over 500 veterans annually find meaningful work, reconnect with purpose, and transition successfully to civilian life. Evan stood in the foundation's new headquarters, a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn that served as training center, job placement office, and community space. The walls were covered with photos of program graduates, their success stories a testament to what was possible when veterans received genuine support. "Captain Mitchell?" A young woman in Army fatigues approached nervously. "I'm Sergeant Jennifer Martinez. I was hoping to talk to you about the program. Please, call me Evan. And you don't need to be nervous." He gestured to his office, really just a glass-walled space with a simple desk and chairs. "Come on, let's talk." They spent an hour discussing her transition, challenges, the difficulty translating combat experience into resume skills, the isolation of civilian life, the feeling of purposelessness after years of intense mission focus. Evan listened with practiced empathy, offering practical advice while sharing his own struggles. "You served 3 tours as a communications specialist," he said, reviewing her file. "That's not just technical skills, that's working under extreme pressure, coordinating complex operations, troubleshooting on the fly. Any Fortune 500 company would be lucky to have you. But they don't see it that way. They see military and assume I can only follow orders. Then we need to teach them better." Evan smiled. "That's what we do here. We bridge the gap. And we don't quit until you land somewhere that values what you bring." After Jennifer left, Evan walked through the training center where 20 veterans were attending a leadership workshop. Alexander Pierce stood at the front, sharing his own journey from arrogant CEO to someone who'd learned to listen and serve. It was a transformation that still amazed Evan. The former tyrant had become one of the Foundation's most effective advocates. "How'd I do?" Alexander asked after the session ended. "You did great, authentic, vulnerable." That's what they need to hear. I learned from the best. Alexander pulled out his phone, showed Evan a news article. Did you see this? The Pentagon is using our model as a template for their own transition programs. Your model. Our model, Evan corrected. This only works because you provided the resources and platform. They walked outside to the small courtyard behind the building, where several veterans were practicing for job interviews with volunteer coaches. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the space. You know what I've learned? Alexander said thoughtfully. That night in Mosul, I thought you saved my life. But really, you gave me the tools to save myself. You showed me what leadership meant, what service looked like. I just forgot for a while. We all forget sometimes. The key is remembering. I'm trying. Every day. Alexander looked at the veterans training nearby. Thank you for giving me the chance to be better than I was. A familiar voice called out. Daddy. Lily, now 10 years old and radiating confidence, ran across the courtyard. She'd grown tall, her mother's features becoming more pronounced with each passing year. Mrs. Chen said you're almost done. Can we get pizza? Pizza again? We had pizza Tuesday. That was 3 whole days ago, she grinned. Besides, I aced my math test. That deserves pizza. She's got you there, Alexander laughed. And actually, I'd love to join you both if that's okay. My treat. Over pizza at their favorite Brooklyn pizzeria, Lily entertained them with stories from school, while Evan and Alexander discussed the foundation's expansion plans. It was comfortable. Easy the friendship between two men who'd found redemption through service. Uncle Alex, Lily said suddenly. She'd started calling him that a year ago. Are you ever going to get married? Daddy says you work too much to date. Alexander choked slightly on his pizza. Well, because my friend Sarah's mom is single and really pretty, and she works at a hospital, so she's used to busy people. Lily, Evan warned gently, but he was fighting a smile. I'm just saying, everyone needs somebody, even workaholics. She said the word carefully, clearly repeating something she'd overheard. Later, after Lily went to bed, Evan sat in his small home office, really just a desk in the corner of his bedroom in their new 2-bedroom apartment. The space wasn't fancy, but it was theirs, earned through honest work and new purpose. His phone buzzed. A message from Tom Brennan, who now served on the foundation's board. Just approved funding for the West Coast expansion. You're changing the game, brother. Another message, this one from Sergeant Martinez. I got the job. Start Monday at the tech company you recommended. I can't thank you enough. These messages came weekly now, small victories, lives changed, purposes reclaimed. Each one mattered more than any medal he'd ever received. The tattoo on his wrist caught his eye as he typed responses. The Falcon, diving eternally towards some unseen target, representing a mission that seemed long ago but remained ever present. Evan had thought Operation Iron Falcon ended when they reached the extraction point. Now he understood it had never ended. It had simply evolved. Leadership wasn't about a single mission or moment of heroism. It was about showing up every day, lifting others up, remembering that every person mattered. It was about teaching by example that redemption was possible, that past mistakes didn't define future purpose. His phone buzzed once more. Alexander, thank you for being patient with me. For seeing who I could be instead of just who I was. You saved my life twice, once in Mosul, once in a ballroom. I won't forget again, Evan typed back. You saved yourself the second time. I just reminded you how, through the thin walls. He could hear Lily sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and calm. This was what he'd fought for, not medals or recognition, but the simple right for his daughter to grow up safe, loved, and proud of her father. The mark on his wrist would always carry the weight of 73 lives saved, of missions completed, of brothers in arms who trusted him with their lives. But now it carried something else too, a reminder that the mission never really ended, that every day offered another chance to serve, to lift, to lead. Evan Mitchell had spent years trying to be invisible, hiding from his past, convinced that anonymity was safety. He'd been wrong. Real safety came from purpose, from community, from using your scars to heal others who carried similar wounds. He was no longer a captain, no longer invisible. He was a father, a friend, a guide for those who'd lost their way. It was quieter work than combat, less dramatic than extraction under fire, but it mattered just as much, maybe more. Outside his window, the city lights blazed against the darkness, each one representing a life, a story, a soul trying to find their way. Tomorrow he'd wake early, make breakfast, send Lily to school. Then he'd go to the foundation and help more veterans find their path forward. The falcon on his wrist remained frozen in its eternal dive. Talons extended, hunting something vital. Evan finally understood what it was hunting. Not glory, or recognition, or redemption. Purpose, connection, service. The same things that made life worth living, whether you wore a uniform or not. And in helping others find their purpose, Evan had reclaimed his own.